Welcome everyone to today's talk on thyroid health. And today we'll be talking about an integrative approach to thyroid health. And if you notice the blob in the background, that's my dog. So if he jumps up and gets excited, we might have to pause for a second. But other than that, we'll keep going. So today we're going to talk about thyroid, exactly what it is, symptoms of thyroid conditions, the causes of the thyroid conditions, different types of testing that we can utilize for thyroid, and a lot of the myths and different thinking around thyroid and how we can bust those. All right. But for those of you that don't know me, my name is Dr. Brennan McLaughlin. And together with my wonderful wife, we started Aquarian Integrative Health almost a decade ago. And we created it for one purpose. And the purpose is to give people the health care they deserve. And we both fully believe that people deserve to be healthy, happy, and whole. And we saw fundamental breaks in the current healthcare system, and we wanted to do something a bit different. And our mission and our goal with Aquarian is to revolutionize healthcare one person at a time. And we do that by providing a comprehensive system of diagnosis and integrative treatments that foster true lasting health and wellness. And for us, our philosophy really centers around the fact that true healing comes from repairing all levels of our health. And I think we are past the time of only looking at the body as just a series of chemical reactions. And for us, all illness involves body, mind, and spirit. And another way to put it really is health involves our biophysiology, so our anatomy and our physiology, the bioenergetics of our system, our nervous system, and our consciousness, so our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and the spiritual level of our health. And true healing really comes from revivifying all of these things. And another huge part of our philosophy is the fact that we are inseparable from our environment. And our environmental inputs, so sun, water, air, can either make us healthy or they can make us really ill. And I firmly believe we require the forces of nature to be healthy. And like I said, we created this just looking at the healthcare landscape and really trying to understand things and how we can do a better job. And for us, there are clear voids in the modern healthcare that need to be addressed. The first one is really the over-specialization of medicine. And we can see that in the thyroid conditions where there's lots of thyroid specialists, but there's a lot of things that affect the thyroid that they don't even consider or is not under their purview. And so we really have to start looking at the body as a whole. There's a fundamental lack of understanding of basic physiology. For instance, when we're talking about the thyroid, how the thyroid relates to the liver and how the liver is required of converting and creating so many thyroid hormones. There's a massive overemphasis on biochemistry in medicine, and whether that's allopathic medicine or alternative medicine. And the reality is we are electromagnetic beings, and so we have to think beyond biochemistry. And a simple thing with the thyroid is the fact that EMFs from our cell phones and all these different things strongly affect our thyroid. And so oftentimes with our thyroid patients, until we rectify that or remediate that, they're still going to have issues with their thyroid. And there's a real lack of understanding of circadian biology, and that's slowly changing, which is a wonderful thing. And by circadian biology, living in alignment with nature and our daylight cycles. And for the thyroid, melatonin and leptin, which are two hormones that are released on a circadian timing, have a massive effect on the thyroid. So until we fix our circadian biology, a lot of the times thyroid issues will persist. In medicine right now, there's a massive inability to find a primary cause, and that's because of the types of testing that's being utilized and all these different things, which is why we've developed certain types of testing and brought in different technologies into our office to really leverage these things to understand what the primary drivers of illness are for people. And a lot of times there's a one-size-fits-all approach for all types of diagnoses and all types of medicine. And we see this a lot with the thyroid. Someone gets their blood measured and they say, you have this type of thyroid condition or that type of thyroid condition, and then they give everyone the same medication. But the reason why people have thyroid conditions vary so dramatically that it's a disservice to the patient. And then the other thing too is that killing spree mentality. So if you have an infection, we'll just go in and give you high dose antibiotics or high dose antimicrobial herbs and all of these things. When the reality is we have to be a little more thoughtful of how the body works. And so our promise to all of our patients is that we find the primary cause to your health problems first and foremost. So we have a very comprehensive set of diagnostic procedures and technologies that we utilize to really find these things out and give you answers. And then once we have the answers, we work relentlessly. And then once we have the answers, we work relentlessly to help you achieve that optimal health that you desire. And we're big believers of having your back through the entire process, because too many times we hear people go to different physicians or different healthcare providers and they're just told a whole bunch of stuff and then left to their own devices. And while that can be fine in some instances, we've just seen time and time again that people do far better when they have accountability, when they have support. And because of those things, we create lasting change to people's health and well-being. And so for us, it's really about truly integrated testing and treatment for lasting solutions. And so we always collect multiple data points on all of our patients to get a big, broad picture of what's actually going on so that we can create a roadmap back to health. So now let's get into thyroid. So this is what a happy, healthy thyroid should look like. Problem is, most of our thyroids look like this. I think a fundamental understanding is needed of what actually the thyroid is. And our thyroid is vital to our well-being as it controls how our body uses energy and how we interact with the world around us and the world inside of us. So our internal environment and our external environment, the thyroid is always adjusting for these kind of things. And our thyroid is constantly modulating our metabolism based on the time of day, the season, and the year, and from other external and internal stressors. And this is a dynamic process that unfortunately one blood test alone cannot capture. And with other hormones, we know that they fluctuate and go up and down, for instance, cortisol or testosterone or estrogen, but that's missed with thyroid. And we'll get into that a little bit, but there is a dynamic process that's occurring on a second-to-second basis with the thyroid. And over time, with persistent stress, we often end up with a thyroid that cannot regulate properly and are given a diagnosis of quote unquote hypo or hyperthyroid, or told we have a thyroid autoimmune condition. And at least 20 million Americans have some form of thyroid disease. And up to 60% of those with thyroid disease are unaware of their condition. So that's 20 million people in America who have a diagnosed thyroid condition. And then there's another 60% of people that don't even realize that they have a thyroid condition. And for me, I think chronic hypothyroidism is one of the most prevalent illnesses in the 21st century. And so many times it's a subclinical thing. And while the people may not have had blood work, or they have, and it's like borderline, and the doctors, maybe we don't know. The reality is most people live sort of in all this. And I'm sure a lot of these things sound familiar to people. Fatigue, weight gain, cold intolerance, joint pain, depression, constipation, chronic infections, inability to detox, inability to get well after you have a mild cold or a flu or something like that. Those are all signs of a hypothyroid, okay? So a thyroid that's very low functioning. And on the flip side, people who have an overregulated thyroid or thyroid that's hyperfunctioning, it's a lot of irregular heartbeats, a lot of nervous system tension, nervousness, irritability, sensitivity to heat, muscle weakness, sleep problems, thinning hair. And in all actuality, more often than not, people fluctuate between these things, right? So you're hypothyroid and hyperthyroid. And again, that's why we have to be very specific with our diagnosis and really understand what we're looking at. And what I've alluded to already, one of the biggest myths is standard blood tests are all you need to diagnose thyroid problems. And the problem with that is blood testing is just a snapshot in time. And because our thyroid hormones and all of our hormones are a very dynamic process in the body, this can often do a disservice to patients. And so we need to correlate any blood tests with presenting symptoms, physical exam, other types of advanced diagnostics and different technologies, And most importantly, the context of the patient. What is going on with the patient, right? And the biggest thing with blood testing too, especially with thyroid blood testing, is there's a massive difference between quote unquote disease values and what's actually optimal. So typically when we get thyroid blood work done, they're going to look at TSH and T4. So TSH is the hormone that's produced in the brain to stimulate the thyroid. And T4 is the sequelae of TSH, and then T4 has to get converted into T3 to become the sort of active form of thyroid hormone. And the problem with this is these are the optimal ranges, okay? So this is what we look at in the office for what's optimal. But then in range, when you look at Quest or LabCorp or any of these other major places, there's a massive range. So for instance, with TSH, we always want it to be around 1.5, maybe a little bit lower, but the range on blood work is 0.3 to 5. So if you have a TSH of 4.9, they will say you're normal, you're fine, even though you have all sorts of symptoms and all these other things going on. Same with T4, we want it a little bit higher generally than what's optimal. And with T3, same thing. We want it to be a little bit higher than what's quote unquote in range. And the biggest thing with this is what we have to realize with ranges on blood tests is they are averages of people who've gotten blood tests. And as a society, as we've gotten sicker and more dysfunctional in general, what's happened is these ranges keep shifting and adjusting to reflect that. So we really have to hang our hat on what's actually optimal for a human body versus what the ranges are. And quite simply, if our T4 and our T3 are low on basic blood work, our TSH should be high. Because what that means is our brain, specifically our pituitary, is working hard to decrease or increase thyroid hormone. Sorry. And so there's a problem with the thyroid and the brain saying, that's fine, we're going to try and produce more thyroid hormone. Now, on the flip side, if everything is low, so TSH is low, T4, T3, everything is low, that's actually a pituitary problem, not a thyroid problem. And there's multiple reasons why that can be. A lot of times this can be post-head trauma, so car accidents, concussions, these kind of things can cause a problem in the brain and the problem in the pituitary, which will reflect as low thyroid. So we have to be very careful when everything's low. And especially given now we're all dealing with environmental toxicities, and the pituitary is not protected by the blood-brain barrier. And so it's very prone to certain types of toxins, different types of heavy metals and fluoride toxins and these kind of things. And so when everything is low, in general, we point to a pituitary problem. And ideally, now, this is only part of the picture. And oftentimes what we'll see is people will come to us and they'll say, hey, we have normal thyroid labs. And it's the typical TSH, T3, T4, but no one's checked their reverse T3. Okay, so someone has symptoms of a deficiency. They have quote unquote normal labs, but reverse T3 hasn't been checked. And so what happens normally is T4 docks onto the cell wall, and iodine is used to cleave off a part of it. And then that gives us the T3. And the T3 is the thing that actually goes into the thyroid and works. There is an enzyme on the cell wall that can create reverse T3. And that happens when in times of chronic starvation, in times of extreme dieting, in times of extreme stress, then we start to produce reverse T3. Because basically what the body is saying is things are too stressful right now. We're not really concerned about the metabolism. We're just going to tone these things down. The problem is we never get away from stress in modern society. And so if I'm continually stressed or continually having these types of problems, and I have normal thyroid blood work, we have to look at reverse T3. And then we also have to really consider lifestyle factors, dietary factors, sleep factors, all of these other things. And so generally when reverse T3 is high, first things we rule out are diet, sleep, starvation, those kind of things. But we also have to check for mercury and aluminum levels. So we do heavy metal testing on all our thyroid patients. We have to look at mold as well because mold exposure can increase reverse T3. And we also have to look at any past history or current history of Lyme disease because Lyme disease can create issues with the thyroid, specifically around reverse T3 as well. Big thing too is the EMF exposure. And so, like I said, the biophysics component of thyroid health is not considered by most physicians. And this is a massive problem because we're all holding our phones right at our thyroid all the time. And that man-made interference from our thyroid and the light interference from our cell phones causes a whole bunch of problems. And we can get massive spikes in reverse T3 because of EMF exposure. Now, the other thing too is sometimes people come into us and they see us and they've been put on some kind of thyroid medication because some of their numbers are off. Now, if you're put on thyroid medication and no one checked reverse T3, you can get into a whole bunch of problems. Because if I'm taking a thyroid medication that's T4 and T3 together, and my reverse T3 is really high, so there's a reason why the body is converting it into reverse T3, all I'm going to end up doing is making more of it. We really have to check that. And if you're already on medication, you never had your reverse T3 checked, please do. And then it's just a simple switch into supplementing using T3 and not T4. Another thing diagnostically that's very helpful, and this has been around forever, is just taking morning temperature. And ideally, morning temperature is higher in the evening and 2 hours after meals than it is in the AM or before meals. And when we're talking about temperature, this gets into the discussion of optimal ranges as well, because temperature's always been 98.6. Okay. And as people have gotten sicker over years and years, it started to go down and go down. So the average person now is about 97.9. Okay, so almost a full degree colder than people were 100 years ago. And this is a massive problem because for every 0.2 degrees of low temperature, we not only get problems, obviously, with our thyroid, but enzymes start to not be able to do their job. So we can't detox, we build up pathogens, we build up heavy metals, we build up all these toxicities for the simple fact that our body temperature is too low. And so the easiest way to do this is when you wake up, use a thermometer under the left armpit. So one of those standard long ones, not a digital thermometer. And it should be between 98.4 and 99.9. If it's below that, we're leaning towards the idea that the thyroid is underfunctioning or we have a hypothyroid. And that could be for many reasons. And if it's high, then we're leaning towards there's a hyperthyroid issue. So the thyroid is working too much. This can also be from acute infection. There can be other nutrient deficiencies going on as well. This is a very easy, simple thing that people can do, even if you are on thyroid medication or even if you are on, whether it's pharmaceutical or natural supplements or some kind of replacement therapy, to monitor how your body's doing in real time. The temperature test is very helpful. And when we start to dig a little bit deeper into things, for all our thyroid patients, it's very important that we do a full liver panel as well. And this is for the simple fact that 60% of our T4 is converted to T3 in the liver. So even though these hormones are working on the thyroid, this conversion predominantly happens in the liver and other tissues in the body. So a lot of times what we'll see is people's TSH and T4 are fine, and those are sort of the two standard tests that people get, but the T3 is not right. And when we look and we do a full liver panel with blood work, we can see that there's problems with the liver for many different reasons. But that's going to massively inhibit how well T4 can get converted to T3 and cause a whole bunch of problems. Also on bloods, we always check leptin. And leptin is the governing hormone that controls all energetic transactions in the body. And leptin gets affected with circadian rhythm problems, with infections, with mold, with dietary habits. So if I'm eating super late at night, or if I'm staying up really late over time, we can generate leptin resistance. And that's where our body stops being responsive to leptin, and that alters our melanocyte stimulating hormone. And melanocyte stimulating hormone is actually one of the things that stimulates the thyroid and raises T3. And so many of our thyroid problems now in modern times is actually because our circadian rhythms and our circadian biology are messed up, and that's having an effect on leptin, and then as a consequence, having an effect on MSH. So we always check all of these things. It's not just about TSH and T4. We're looking at liver panel, we're looking at reverse T3, we're looking at leptin, we're looking at MSH, and we're also looking at antibodies. And so there's different types of antibodies. Some are targeting thyroid enzymes, some are targeting thyroid tissue themselves. And the biggest question we need to always ask with antibodies is, why is the body targeting that specific tissue? And in this case of the thyroid, why is the body targeting the thyroid? There can be lots of reasons. It can be from mold exposure, it can be from EMF exposure. There's a cross reaction between the gluten protein that's found in wheat and thyroid tissue. So that can be part of it. It can be from pesticides. It can be from mercury or other heavy metals. And it can also be from chronic infection. And this is a super important thing I want everyone to understand is our bodies aren't dumb. And so if we have autoimmune antibodies to something, there's a reason why the body is attacking that tissue. And oftentimes, it's always an infection or a toxicity at the root of it. And more often than not, it's also an environmental mismatch. And so we get into living life and we stop respecting normal circadian biology, which creates a lot of problems with our hormones, which creates a lot of problems with our immune system. So our immune system becomes overreactive to things. And then we add in toxicities and infections to the mix that we all just naturally will get. And that really sets the stage for autoimmune reactions as we see these antibodies. And in the case of the thyroid, mercury is a very well-known thing to cause autoimmune thyroiditis, as is Lyme disease. Lyme disease has been known to cause autoimmune thyroiditis for years now. And to correlate with Lyme, also Bartonella or cat scratch fever, which can be a co-infection of Lyme, but we can get it from other ways, from other biting insects or from cats, can cause autoimmune thyroiditis. And we have to consider these things. And on top of those infections, we also have to consider the fact that when we disrupt our circadian biology, it impairs the immune system and our immune system becomes dysregulated. So that the disruption of the circadian biology really sets the stage for an immune system that can't properly regulate. And then if we get Lyme disease, mercury exposure, other heavy metals, Bartonella exposure, mold, EMF, all these things, then all of a sudden we have an autoimmune reaction to the thyroid. Now, having thyroid antibodies does not mean you have to go on immunosuppressive drugs, okay? Because immunosuppressive drugs basically is saying, okay, we have these antibodies, and so we're just going to suppress your immune system even more and hope that you no longer have symptoms. But if half the reason why we have these antibodies to begin with is because we have a massive disruption in our circadian rhythms and there's hidden infections or toxicities there, as long as we don't solve those, then we're just going to be on immunosuppressive drugs that have side effects and consequences of taking them for the rest of our lives. And that's not, to me, that's not medicine. That's just managing symptoms and putting people on drugs. And so just to give you guys an example of this, as far as the autoimmune goes, we had a 28-year-old female come into our office, currently experiencing fatigue, trouble sleeping, headaches, constantly cold, hypothyroid type symptoms. But she also had a history of Lyme disease, mold illness, heavy metal toxicity. So a whole bunch of stuff that she had treated previously, but was still having symptoms of all of these things. And when we ran some of her blood work, I just pulled out some of the numbers here. Her anti-TPO antibodies, which is one of the thyroid antibodies, was 1,160, and it should be under 50. should be close to 0, but ideally under 50, and that's a good start. Our reverse T3 was also quite high. The rest of the numbers were not optimal, but like definitely within reasonable ranges. And we commenced a period of treatment, but we did not address the antibodies themselves yet. And we didn't even really address the thyroid itself yet. And we can see on follow-up, I believe this was 5 months later, her antibodies went from 1,160 to 55 without actually doing anything directly with the thyroid or the antibodies. We just improved the health of her overall system, changed some things with her lifestyle, with her circadian rhythms, worked on a number of different organ systems and all of these things, and improved her drainage and her ability to detox. And these things started to self-correct. So many times people get hung up on blood work, and that's okay, but we have to understand that there's an order of operations in the body. And if we don't know how to navigate that or aren't working with someone who understands how to navigate those things, then we definitely get stuck. Because she had other people recommending that she go on all these different immunosuppressive drugs and all these other things and synthetic hormones and yada, yada, yada. We didn't do any of that. Okay. We just improved her body's ability to heal itself through a number of different natural supplements, lifestyle factors, at-home technologies that she utilized, and her immune antibodies have gone way down. Now, there's still work to do, and there's still other things that she has to attend to, but this is just to showcase to you guys what's possible. And before we move on, one of the things I really want to consider is if we do blood work and if things are too high or too low. If it's too high, is there a reason why the body is upregulating the metabolism? That's a good question to ask. Oftentimes that comes down to lifestyle. Oftentimes that comes down to other factors internally. And on the flip side, is there a reason why the body would downregulate metabolism? And both of these are natural, perfect mechanisms. So when we upregulate our metabolism, we're usually upregulating at a time of stress. So there's a lot of life stress going on or internal stress. I have some kind of infection or something. And things are downregulated typically as a protective mechanism from prolonged fasting. And that could be from prolonged intermittent fasting. That could be from prolonged caloric restriction. So a lot of the times the start of a thyroid treatment is very simply fixing some dietary and lifestyle things to incentivize the body to actually want to use the thyroid and incentivize the body to actually have a functioning metabolism first. Big thing I've alluded to too is everyone just thinks, oh, you just get blood tests and then you apply an intervention and then it magically fixes the blood tests and then you're fine. So this is a thing that is very prevalent in medicine, not just with the thyroid, but with everything. And everything's about biochemistry. And the reality is the thyroid is not just based on biochemistry. And so we have different types of rhythms in our body. We have our circadian rhythms, which everyone kind of understands is sort of the day-light cycle, that 24-hour cycle. And there's a circadian component to thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone should be lower at night when we're sleeping or we're about to sleep, and it's higher during the day. We also have something called our ultradian rhythms, which are hourly or almost hourly fluctuations in different processes in our body. And for the thyroid, our TSH kind of pulses every 30 minutes, okay? And that can fluctuate based on a lot of different factors. But we have this 24-hour cycle of thyroid, and then we have almost hourly pulsations of thyroid. So it's not like we're getting a constant stream of hormone. And then the other thing too is there's seasonal rhythms. In the seasons where the sun is abundant and the days are longer and all of these things, we are designed to be outside. We are designed to get sunshine. We are designed to do all of those things. And actually, in the summer months, our thyroid hormone always downregulates. So our thyroid hormone is actually lower in the summer than it is in the winter, because when it's colder, darker, all of these things, we need an internal boost in metabolism because we're not getting the energy from the sun. We're not getting the energy from being outdoors. And so these are normal things, but these are all things that have to be considered and usually aren't, unfortunately, when people get blood work. And on the circadian rhythm component of it, melatonin is massively important for the thyroid. So under normal circumstances, melatonin binds within the hypothalamus in our brain at night. And this exerts an inhibitory action on TSH in the pituitary. The only way TSH stops pumping out is because melatonin binds to the hypothalamus and says it's nighttime, it's time to go to sleep, and then our TSH goes down. And so many people that we see get really hot flashes or other problems with being too hot at night. And really what this suggests is that mechanism of melatonin is broken. Because if the melatonin binds properly and the TSH goes down properly, we should be cooler at night than we are during the day. And reduced pineal melatonin secretion induced by light stimulus increases our TSH. So they've done a lot of studies where they're measuring someone's TSH and they stimulate daylight while they're sleeping. And that spikes TSH and thyroid hormones at a time when they're not supposed to be. So if we compound that over days, weeks, months, years, what happens is that mechanism starts to get broken. And what happens after melatonin binds to the hypothalamus decreases that TSH, leptin binds in the same area of the brain. And that binding of leptin is necessary for the production of TSH and the thyroid hormones during the day. So when melatonin can't bind because we're getting too much light at night, not only do we get spikes of TSH during the night when we're not supposed to, but leptin can't bind, and then we lose the ability to have our thyroid hormone secrete normally during the day. And usually when we're talking about circadian biology and thyroid hormone, we're just looking at that right side of the screen, right? So we're just looking at the TSH to T4 to T3. Reality is there's a whole bunch of other steps before that, and it all centers around the light that we get in our eyes. So if I'm getting too much light at night, if I'm not getting enough light during the day, this sets the stage within the eye into the hypothalamus and ultimately into pituitary gland to have massively dysregulated TSH, and that will dysregulate our T4 and our T3. And over time, that becomes a massive problem. So usually a big part of correcting our thyroid imbalances is fixing our circadian biology. And that starts with respecting the daylight cycles of the 24-hour clock. So we want sun during the day when the sun's up, and we want it to be dark at night leading up to bed and when we're sleeping. And so given all of that, everyone says, okay, that's fine, but I can just do some synthetic replacement. And I can take levothyroxine or Synthroid or what have you, and I'll just fix things. Now, we have to be very careful with that because there's other things involved. So if I fix my circadian biology, I've ruled in or out any types of infections, toxicities, all of these things, then the other thing we also have to look at is cofactors. And very simply, I've laid this out here. If we have a high T3, we could have a lithium deficiency. And lithium is a mineral that we all need in small amounts. If we have low T3, it could be a selenium deficiency, specifically selenium. And if we have a low T4, it could be an iodine deficiency. And when we break these things down, we need zinc, we need B vitamins, and we need other types of vitamins in order for proper production of thyroid hormone. So if we do all the circadian biology and really fix our light environment, if we rule in or out infections and then deal with those properly, we still have to look at cofactors. So what does the thyroid actually need, and what do these hormones actually need as cofactors? to be able to create enough to be able to convert T4 to T3 and then be able to utilize them. And one of the biggest things we see is iron deficiency impairing thyroid metabolism. And autoimmune thyroid patients are frequently iron deficient because there's an autoimmune condition that's starting in the gut for different reasons, or it could be for very similar reasons, which reduces iron absorption. And that causes autoimmune thyroid issues. And so again, we have to take a big step back and look at the body as a whole and recognize that yes, the thyroid is in control of our metabolism, but it's also working in tandem with everything else in our body. And so in order to increase conversion of T4 to T3, we need selenium and we need zinc. And again, we need proper liver function. Okay. And like I've said before, we need to actually incentivize the body to want to have a working metabolism. We need to incentivize the body to utilize thyroid hormone to produce thyroid hormone. So again, zinc becomes a huge thing, but also exercise. If I have a hypothyroid condition, I can take all of the natural medications, I can take all the Synthroid or synthetic replacements as I want. But if I'm not incentivizing my body to use its metabolism properly and exercising and moving and doing all these things, then I'm not going to get very far at the end of the day. So we have to, again, figure out cofactors, which usually means quite simply improving diet. We can get some of these things from supplementation for short periods of time, but it's really about finding the right diet for us to support our metabolism, to give us these cofactors, build up the thyroid again. We have to respect our circadian biology, and we have to look at for other influences on increasing or decreasing thyroid. And another one of those influences is the fact that the thyroid lives in the front of our neck and it's in very close proximity to a whole bunch of other things. And one of the big myths is for some reason, everyone thinks a thyroid is this magically isolated system that doesn't exist in tandem with other things. And what I always ask myself and ask patients sometimes is this a thyroid gland problem or is the thyroid just in a bad neighborhood? And as you can see, that thyroid sits right here. And we have veins in gray, we have arteries, we have nerves, we have everything going on in our face and our neck that becomes very important when we're looking at these things. And one of the biggest things is the veins. And so we have these big veins that drain everything out of our brain that sit on either side of our thyroid. And there's a very common condition called vascular insufficiency, which happens when there is some type of infection or toxicity within the veins in the front of the neck, causing either a stenosis or a decrease in flow in the veins. And if it's a toxicity or an infection, and we slow down the flow of our veins, not only can our brain not detox properly at night and we get buildup of metabolites and things in the brain, but then also there is a spillover from the veins into the surrounding tissue, and this includes the thyroid. And in that same thinking, on top of our veins, we have these big lymphatics that also help drain the brain of any toxicity, drain the tonsils and the throat of any toxicity. But if they get polluted with toxins, infections, and all these different things, then that can bleed into the thyroid. And typically with people, when I see them and they have altered thyroid values, they also have lymph issues, so swelling in the hands and feet. They chronically have sore throats, tonsil stones, sinus issues, all these other things, leading to really looking at these things. And when we actually palpate the thyroid and actually touch it and look at it and touch the lymphatics, there's a lot of swelling in the neck, either from a toxicity or an infection, or just simply a lack of flow in that area. And when there's a lack of flow in the veins and the lymphatics, that will bleed over into inflammation, stress, toxins, and infections within the thyroid. So this is always something that we have to rule in or rule out. And when we think of thyroid nodules, which are a very common thing, thyroid nodules are basically calcium-based nodules that are trying to sequester off toxins, chemicals, pathogens, all these different things that is coming into contact with it because of the veins and because of the lymphatics and because of things going on in the rest of the body. And so rather than just trying to surgically remove a nodule, we have to figure out why it's there, and what the body is trying to sequester away and what the body is trying to protect the thyroid from. And so as we move up, we can start thinking about the tonsils. And I've talked about the veins and the lymphatics, and that will often get backed up because there's a persistent chronic infection in the tonsils. Okay. And very common infections in the tonsils that are chronic are strep infections and mycoplasma infections. And we see both of those things affecting the thyroid in our office. Okay. So someone might have altered thyroid labs and think, oh, we just need to treat the thyroid. But if they have a strep infection or a mycoplasma infection, these things can also affect the thyroid. And especially in the case of mycoplasma, it's a certain type of bacteria that can actually use thyroid hormone for its own energy. Okay. So we have to examine the tonsils. We have to rule in, rule out these different types of infections that can be in the tonsils and ensure that the lymphatics are draining from the brain into the tonsils, into the lymphatic to the neck, and then out into the digestive system. We also have to look at teeth and consider teeth, because I've spoken on the fact that mercury can cause the thyroid to create an autoimmune reaction, and that mercury exposure is primarily from silver amalgam fillings. And so once silver amalgam fillings are placed in, they begin to off-gas mercury over time. Every time you chew gum, every time you eat, every time you drink, all these things, you're constantly off-gassing mercury. And because it is a heavy metal, it moves down in the body. And so we'll see a lot of times people who've had thyroid issues, it started weeks, months, or even a year or two after they've gotten some dental work done. And sometimes, not all the time, the thyroid issue is remediated when the dental work is corrected. So once we remove the amalgams, then the thyroid can re-regulate because it's no longer constantly being exposed to mercury. And when we look at the energetics of the body, the meridian, specifically the stomach meridian, travels on either side of the thyroid. And a lot of times we see people with stomach issues also have thyroid issues. And the thing that connects these things two together is the stomach meridian. And this is just the energetic neurological connection between these two things. And when we expand ourselves out even more and look at the real bioenergetics of the body, a lot of times with a thyroid condition, we can have a throat chakra issue. And all chakras are constellations of nervous system tissue around certain endocrine glands in the body. Okay. And a lot of times people with thyroid issues, it began during times in their lives where they felt like they couldn't speak up, or times in their lives where they felt like they couldn't be quiet about something, or they couldn't speak their truth. And all of these things affect the thyroid because it affects the throat chakra. And sometimes thyroid conditions only resolve once we address the chakra component. So as we expand our view out even more, we have to look at the body's stress response in general. And this has to include the adrenals. So once we've looked at the thyroid and all of the infections, toxicities, all of these things that can go into it, all of the organ systems related to thyroid, we also have to look at the adrenals. And generally, I always look at the adrenals if someone has high TSH. And there's a number of tests we can do, simple cortisol blood test. We can also use something like a Dutch test to measure over 24 hours what someone's cortisol response is doing. And really what this is, cortisol is the sort of hormone number one, okay? And cortisol is meant to spike when we wake up, but it's also meant to spike when we respond to life stresses. Problem is we are constantly inundated with life stresses 24/7. And so eventually we start to lose these normal feedback loops, and either our cortisol just gets stuck really high and stays there, or eventually it's, I'm not going to produce that much because everything is just stressful. And so the thing that has to take over is the thyroid. Okay. And then we get high TSH, high thyroid values, all of these other things. So anytime we're looking at any thyroid condition, we also have to look at the adrenals to see what the overall stress response of the body is. All right. And at the end of the day, the body is a dynamic system that is designed to keep us healthy. We are not at war with our body. We're not fighting with our body. Everything is designed to keep us healthy. And if there's a problem in the body, there's absolutely a reason for the problem. And because there's reasons for these problems, I believe that we owe it to ourselves to get to the bottom of it. And rather than just trying to mask symptoms, rather than just trying to hide things away or kick the can down the line, when we get to the bottom of it, that means we can have true lasting health and real freedom in our lives because we're not beholden to these different types of conditions. And I think for us, that's the big difference between Aquarian Integrative Health and other functional medicine practices or other medical practices, is that we really dig deep to find these primary causes. We really seek to understand the totality of someone's being on all levels to provide the best possible solutions for that person. And just because you've been diagnosed with something or just because blood work says something, we need to take a big step back, look at the context of the patient, look at all of the different types of testing that we can utilize to get a very clear picture of what's going on and how we can help, and then build out an exact roadmap of how to get better, rather than just doing a whole bunch of aimless treatments or treating one part of the body and then going to another part of the body and all of these things. We have to look at everything together and then build out a thoughtful roadmap on how to get better. And so I'd love it if you guys could join us in revolutionizing your health. You are welcome to book a free consultation today. You can do that at aquarianhealthsolutions.com, or you can email us, support@aquariansolution.com, or text the office anytime, 689-219-6979. Thank you so much.